The twin suns hung low over the city of Zarthan, casting long shadows over the crowded marketplace. The air was heavy with the smell of strange spices, burning oils, and the metallic scent of blood. Voices called out from every direction. Merchants shouting their prices, customers bargaining, guards ordering people to move along. In the center of the market stood a raised platform of black stone, surrounded by cages. Each cage held a living being, creatures from distant worlds. Some silent, some crying, some staring blankly at the ground. In one of those cages sat a girl unlike any other. Her skin shimmered with pale silver tones, and her hair, dark and tangled, framed a face marked with dirt and defiance. Her eyes were golden, not the soft gold of a warm day, but the sharp gold of a predator's gaze. Her wrists were bound, with metal cuffs, and a chain linked them to the bars of the cage. Even so, her posture was not that of a prisoner in despair, but of a fighter waiting for the next challenge. She had earned a name in this market. The untamable, no buyer, had kept her for more than a day. The moment anyone tried to control her, she bit, scratched, kicked, or did worse. Some called her dangerous, others called her useless. But the merchant who owned her today only saw her as a chance for profit. The merchant, a fat alien with 4 eyes and a sharp tongue, stood beside her cage. Step forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "here is a rare creature from the edge of the galaxy, strong, young, and spirited." A few curious buyers came closer, but when the girl lifted her head and bared her teeth, they quickly stepped back. The merchant laughed as if it was all a joke, but there was frustration in his eyes. Suddenly, the crowd parted slightly. A tall human man walked through the noise and dust. He wore a simple brown coat, his face partly shadowed by a hood. His eyes scanned the cages. But when they landed on the girl, he stopped. For a moment, neither moved. The girl's golden eyes locked on his, and there was something different in the way he looked at her, not as a thing to be bought, but as a person. The merchant noticed his interest and moved quickly. "Ah, human, you have good taste," he said with a toothy grin, "but be warned. She's not for the weak-hearted." The man, whose name was Elias, stepped closer to the cage. He crouched slightly so he was at her eye level. "Hello," he said softly, his voice calm. The girl tilted her head. Watching him carefully, he didn't smell of fear like the others, and he didn't try to reach for her. Instead, he simply met her gaze as if waiting for her to speak. The merchant unlocked the cage door halfway and grabbed the chain to pull her forward. "Show the gentleman your teeth," he joked. The girl's eyes narrowed, and in one swift motion, she lunged and bit his thick finger hard. The merchant screamed, pulling his hand away as blood dripped to the ground. The crowd gasped. Some laughed. Others stepped back in fear. Elias did not move. Instead, he looked at her and said, "You don't like cages, do you?" She did not answer, but her expression shifted just slightly from rage to curiosity. The merchant wrapped a cloth around his bleeding hand and glared at her. "She's hopeless," he growled. Too wild, too stupid to obey. Elias stood up straight, his decision already made. "I'll take her," he said simply. The merchant blinked in surprise. "You? Are you serious?" "You'll regret it within the hour," he said. Elias took out a small pouch of coins and dropped it into the merchant's good hand. The clink of metal was enough to make the alien smile again. "Fine, human, she's yours. But don't come running back to me when she tears your throat out." Elias stepped into the cage slowly, his hands open to show he carried no weapon. He unfastened the chain from the bars and then gently removed the cuffs from her wrists. Her skin was cold to the touch. Her arms, thin but strong. For a moment, she stood still, as if expecting a trick. Then, instead of running, she followed him out of the cage, her steps silent but steady. The crowd watched in disbelief as the untamable girl walked beside the human without being dragged or beaten. Some whispered that the human had some kind of magic. Others thought the girl was planning to attack him later, but Elias said nothing, leading her through the maze of stalls and away from the noise. The marketplace faded behind them, replaced by quieter streets where the air was cleaner. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt the warmth of the suns on her face without the shadow of a cage. She glanced at Elias, still unsure of his intentions, but deep inside, a tiny spark of something new began to stir. Not trust. Not yet, but the possibility of it. The streets beyond the marketplace were quieter, but the smell of dust and smoke still lingered in the air. Elias walked ahead at an easy pace, not looking back to see if the girl followed. She trailed behind him, her bare feet almost soundless against the stone path. Every few steps, her golden eyes darted left and right, scanning every doorway, every shadow. She had learned long ago that danger could hide anywhere. The weight of freedom felt strange to her. No cage bars pressing against her back, no chain pulling at her wrists. But freedom also meant uncertainty, and uncertainty could be just as frightening as captivity. Her mind kept repeating one question: why had this human bought her? No one had ever wanted her for more than a few hours before deciding she was trouble. Why would he be any different? Elias led her to a small courtyard tucked between tall buildings. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the air from a nearby bakery. Children laughed somewhere far away, their voices echoing faintly. It was a sound the girl had almost forgotten existed. He stopped near a stone bench and sat down, patting the space beside him. She didn't move. Instead, she crouched a few feet away, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're safe now," Elias said quietly. The words meant little to her. She had heard promises before, promises that turned into chains, beatings, and cold rooms. Her lips curled in a silent snarl. Elias noticed, but he didn't push. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle, unwrapping it to reveal bread and dried fruit. He placed it on the bench between them and leaned back, letting her decide. She eyed the food suspiciously. Her stomach growled, betraying her hunger. Finally, she took a cautious step forward, snatched a piece of bread, and stepped back. She bit into it quickly, ready to throw it away if it tasted wrong, but it was warm, soft, and real. No bitter taste of drugs or poison. She ate in silence, stealing quick glances at the human. He didn't try to touch her, didn't speak, just sat quietly, letting her finish. When she swallowed the last bite, Elias spoke again. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. Names were dangerous. Names gave people power over you. Instead, she rose to her feet, ready to leave, but Elias stood too, blocking the narrow path out of the courtyard. Her eyes narrowed, her body tensed like a coiled spring. "I'm not stopping you," he said, raising his hand slowly. "I just want to know if you'll hear me out." She tilted her head, suspicious but curious. "I know you've been hurt," he continued. "I know no one has given you a reason to trust them, but I'm not here to own you," he added softly. The words were strange to her. Not here to own you, as if they were from another language. Before she could reply, a shadow fell over the courtyard. 3 large figures entered, thugs from the marketplace. Sent by the merchant, one of them pointed at her. Grinning, "There she is," he said. "The Wild One merchant says she's worth triple if she's alive." Elias stepped in front of her without hesitation. His hand hovered near the blaster at his side, but he didn't draw it yet. The thugs moved closer, their boots scraping the ground. The girl's heartbeat quickened. This was familiar. She had been taken like this before, dragged away in chains, but something inside her snapped. With a sudden burst of speed, she darted past Elias and lunged at the first thug, her teeth sank deep into his arm, and he screamed, swinging wildly. She didn't let go until blood spilled onto the ground. The second thug tried to grab her, but she twisted free. Kicking him hard in the knee, Elias moved fast, striking the third thug and shoving him into the wall. The fight was over in moments. The thugs limped away, cursing and holding their wounds. Elias turned to her. Breathing hard, she stood there, chest rising and falling, her hands trembling. Her golden eyes met his. But there was no defiance this time, only something softer. "You didn't have to do that," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. She shook her head slowly. "You stepped in front of me," she replied in a low voice, the first words she had spoken to him. It startled him. Her voice was quiet but strong. "What should I call you?" He asked again. She hesitated, the old fear still whispering in her mind. But then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she said, "I have no name." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we'll find one together," he said. The girl didn't know why, but the thought didn't scare her as much as it should have. For the first time, she wondered if maybe this human really was different. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden light across the courtyard. She followed Elias as he turned toward the distant docking bays, and in her mind, the bite she had given him, the bite that started it all, no longer felt like an act of war. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. The sun was sinking lower, painting the city in shades of gold and red. Elias and the girls stepped out of the courtyard and into the winding streets. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of cooking fires and the faint hum of evening markets. She walked a few steps behind him, her eyes darting to every sound, every shadow. Old habits were hard to kill. She had learned to expect trouble at any turn. The streets here were different from the main market. No cages, no shouting merchants, no chains rattling in the distance. Instead, there were small homes made of kids. Instead, there were small homes made of kwai. Since it was small CBDS made sev. My cage is, my cage, my said. Your sevid is epitive, my cage were a love. My gabe, my acquisitive, my acor or on my beside it is excise. Cussive, we a love, we say we a love it, canad licid. We see log to kai wa you say I cosic it I seek it, ka you let a sits to get it piece it up I to piece it to we to do it and it's it a use this with a it to the peak altitude degree test this stone and metal, their doors open to let in the evening air. Children ran past, chasing a glowing ball that floated just above the ground. One of them slowed when he saw her, his eyes widening at her silver skin and golden eyes. But before he could speak, his mother called him inside, and he vanished behind a sliding door. Elias walked at a steady pace, not hurrying her, not forcing her. From time to time, he glanced back, checking if she was still there. She was. Though her steps were cautious, every muscle in her body was tense, ready to flee if she sensed danger. Yet something about the way the human moved, calm, unafraid, made her want to keep following. They passed a small fountain in the center of a square. The girl slowed, staring at the water that sparkled under the fading light. It had been years since she had seen clean water that wasn't locked away or rationed. Elias noticed her gaze and stopped beside the fountain. "You can drink," he said simply. She hesitated, glancing around to see if it was a trick. When no one moved to stop her, she knelt and cupped her hands, bringing the cool water to her lips. The taste was so fresh, it startled her. It reminded her of something she could barely remember, a stream running through her homeworld. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the memory linger. When she opened them, Elias was still there, watching quietly. No demand, no chain, no command, just waiting. It was unsettling, but also Strange in a way she couldn't name, they kept walking until the streets grew quieter. Ahead, a small docking bay came into view, its gates guarded by 2 sleepy officers inside. Ships of all shapes and sizes rested under the glow of overhead lights. Some were sleek and fast, built for speed, others heavy and rusted, built for hauling goods across long distances. In the far corner sat a modest ship. Not new, but well kept. Elias led her toward it, the sound of his boots echoing on the metal floor. "This is mine," he said, stopping at the base of the ramp. The girl stayed a few steps back, eyeing the ship like a trapped animal watching a cage door. Elias seemed to understand. "You can leave if you want," he said softly. "But if you come aboard, you can rest, eat, and sleep without chains." Her eyes narrowed. "And if I try to leave later?" she asked quietly. "Then you leave," he replied. "I'm not here to own you." His words didn't match the world she knew. In her world, every offer came with a hidden trap, but she was tired, hungry, and her legs ached from the days. "Walk slowly," she stepped forward, her bare feet touching the cool metal ramp. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the faint scent of oil and clean fabric. The walls were lined with simple shelves, a few tools, and an old jacket hanging on a hook. It was nothing like the crowded, filthy rooms she had known before. Elias moved to a small corner and pointed to a low bed with folded blankets. "You can use this," he said. "There's food in the galley if you're hungry." She didn't answer, but her eyes scanned the space. No locks on the doors, no chains on the floor, no hidden guards waiting to strike. It felt open, too open, almost. She walked to the bed and touched the blanket. Soft, clean, unfamiliar. Elias stepped back toward the ramp. "I'll be outside for a while," he said. "You can rest if you want." She looked at him sharply. "You're leaving me here?" He nodded. "Yes, unless you want to come with me." She frowned, trying to understand this strange man. In her experience, owners never left their property unwatched. But this human acted as if she could be trusted, even when she had given him no reason to. When he left, she sat on the bed, listening to the faint hum of the ship for the first time in years. The silence around her didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a pause, a moment between the life she had lived and something else she didn't yet understand. Outside, Elias leaned against the ship's hull, looking up at the night sky. He had bought her on instinct, without a clear plan, but he knew one thing: if she stayed, she would never see the inside of a cage again. Inside, the girl laid down. Slowly, her golden eyes fixed on the door. She did not trust him, not yet, but for the first time. She didn't feel the urge to run. Morning came softly inside the ship, the faint hum of its systems mixing with the distant sounds of the docking bay waking up. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the blanket from the night. Before, she had slept lightly, waking at every small noise. Yet it was the first time in years she had rested without the cold bite of chains against her skin. The door to the ship hissed open, and Elias stepped inside, carrying a small bag from the market. He glanced at her, offering a faint smile. "Morning," he said simply. Placing the bag on the small table, she didn't answer, but her eyes followed his every move. He took out fresh bread, dried meat, and a small jar of something that smelled sweet. Without asking, he divided the food into 2 portions. Placing one on the table in front of her, she hesitated, still suspicious. "Eat," he said, not as a command, but as a quiet suggestion. After a moment, she reached for the bread and began to eat slowly. Elias didn't press her for conversation, simply sitting across from her, chewing his own meal. When the food was gone, he stood and walked to a narrow storage compartment. He pulled out a folded piece of clothing, a simple tunic and soft trousers. "These should fit you," he said. Setting them down on the bed, she frowned. "What's wrong with these?" she asked, glancing at her own torn, dirt-stained garments. "They're falling apart." Elias replied. "And you deserve better than rags?" The word deserve made her freeze for a moment. No one had ever told her she deserved anything before. While she changed in the small washroom, Elias began adjusting the controls on the ship's console. When she returned, the tunic hung loosely on her thin frame. But it was clean and soft. He gave her a short nod of approval. "Better," he said simply. She crossed her arms, unsure how to respond. Her instinct was to challenge him, to test his patience. It was how she had survived, so she walked over to the console and pressed random buttons, watching his reaction instead of shouting. Elias calmly reached over and turned the controls back. "That one opens the cargo bay," he explained. "That one starts the engine." She blinked. At him? "You're telling me how it works?" "Yes," he said. "If you're going to be on this ship, you should know what everything does." Her suspicion deepened. Most owners kept their servants ignorant. Yet here was this human, teaching her without fear that she might use the knowledge against him over the next few days. She watched how Elias moved through the world. He treated the ship like a home, not a prison. When he cooked, he made enough for both of them without asking for anything in return. When he spoke to people in the markets, he didn't raise his voice or use threats. He negotiated with respect. It was so different from everything she had known that it almost made her uneasy. Sometimes she caught herself waiting for him to reveal the hidden cruelty she was sure must be there, but it never came. One evening, as the suns were setting, Elias asked if she wanted to walk with him into the city. She almost refused, but curiosity won. The streets were crowded. Yet she noticed how people greeted him with nods and quiet smiles. They respected him, though he wasn't rich or powerful. At a small stall, he bought 2 cups of steaming spiced tea and handed one to her. The heat warmed her fingers. The sweet, bitter taste strange but pleasant. She sipped it slowly, watching him speak to the stall owner in a language she didn't know. On the walk back, they passed a group of street performers, alien musicians playing strange, echoing instruments. A small child with bright scales danced in front of them. Laughing, the girl stopped for a moment, watching the scene. It stirred something inside her, a memory of a time before the cages. Before the chains, Elias noticed her stillness, but said nothing, letting her decide when to move on. Later that night, back on the ship, she sat on the floor near the console. "Why do you do this?" she asked, suddenly. "Do what?" Elias replied without looking up from the small tool he was fixing. "Treat me like I matter," she said quietly. He set the tool down and met her gaze. "Because you do," he answered simply. The words made her heart tighten in a way she didn't understand. She looked away quickly, not ready to face whatever feeling had just stirred inside her. Before going to bed, she surprised herself by asking, "What's your name again?" "Elias," he replied with a small smile. She nodded slowly, committing it to memory. It was the first time she had spoken his name. And as she lay down to sleep, the hum of the ship around her, she realized something she no longer thought of this place as just his ship. It was becoming their ship, whether she admitted it or not. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. Elias kept busy repairing the ship's navigation system, while the girl, still without a name, spent her time exploring every corner of the vessel. She had started asking questions about the controls, about the galaxy maps, even about the strange tools Elias kept in the storage compartments. She still didn't trust him fully, but she was beginning to trust the space between them. The unspoken rule that he would not harm her, but far away. In the dark alleys of Zarthon's market district, the merchant who had lost her was still burning. With anger, his wounded finger had healed, but his pride had not. He had been humiliated, first in front of buyers, then in front of the crowd, and now his best chance at profit had walked away with a human. He gathered a small group of hired hunters. rough-looking aliens who specialized in retrieving property for the highest bidder. Their instructions were simple: bring the girl back alive and make the human regret ever crossing him. On the fourth night since leaving the market, Elias decided they needed more supplies before leaving Zarthan's orbit. He told the girl to come with him. Partly because she was starting to feel restless, partly because he didn't want her alone if trouble came. The city streets at night were quieter than during the day, but shadows moved in every corner. They passed through a narrow docking corridor lit by flickering lights, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. That's when she felt the prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She slowed her steps, her golden eyes scanning the shadows. Elias noticed her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "We're being followed," she whispered. He didn't argue, just shifted his position so he was between her and the darkest corners of the passage. A moment later, the sound of boots grew louder. 4 figures stepped into view, blocking their path forward. Behind them, 2 more appeared, sealing off the way they had come. The leader, a tall, scarred alien with glowing red eyes, grinned. "Hand her over, human, and maybe we let you walk away," he said. Elias's voice stayed calm. "Not happening." He replied. The leader's smile widened. "Fine, take them both," he barked to his men. The hunters moved fast, but so did the girl. Before Elias could draw his blaster, she launched herself at the nearest attacker. Teeth bared, her jaws clamped down on his forearm, making him howl in pain. Elias fired a warning shot into the wall, forcing the others to duck. The narrow space turned into chaos, shouts, the hiss of energy weapons, the clang of boots on metal. The girl fought like a cornered animal, striking with her claws, biting, twisting free whenever someone grabbed her. Elias stayed close, his shots precise, never wasting a round, but they were outnumbered. And the attackers were closing in. One hunter lunged at the girl from behind, wrapping an arm around her neck before she could react. Elias slammed into him, knocking them both into the wall. They broke free and bolted toward a side passage, Elias grabbing her arm to guide her. The hunters gave chase. But Elias knew the docking bay's layout better than most. He had studied it when they first landed. They weaved through maintenance corridors, ducking under pipes and leaping over supply crates. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, but it wasn't gone. When they finally reached the ship, Elias didn't stop until the ramp was up and the hatch sealed. Both of them stood in the entryway, breathing hard. Her hands trembled, her hair clinging to her face with sweat. "You could have left me," she said suddenly, her voice low. "I didn't," he replied simply. She stared at him for a long moment before looking away. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear, she said, "Leora." Elias frowned slightly. "That's your name?" She nodded once. "It was before," she said, the words heavy with meaning. Elias gave a small, approving nod. "Then Leora it is," he said. Something in her chest shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something that made her want to stay as the ship's engines rumbled to life. She sat down near the console, still shaking but refusing to show fear. Outside, the hunters were nowhere in sight. But both of them knew this wasn't the end. Trouble had found them once, and it would try again, for the first time since they met. The girl Leora realized that running away from Elias was no longer an option she wanted to take. Not because she couldn't survive on her own, but because, for the first time in years, she didn't have to. The ship drifted quietly above Zarthan, the planet's glowing cities shrinking below them. Elias sat in the pilot's chair, guiding the vessel into open space. Behind him, Leora leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the stars through the small viewing window. Her heart was still racing from the ambush, though she tried not to show it. The hunters had failed this time. But she knew the merchant's pride would not let the matter go so easily. Elias didn't speak for a while. letting the silence settle between them. Finally, he said, "We need to decide where to go next." She raised an eyebrow. "We?" She thought. "I can take you anywhere," he continued. "If you want to find your homeworld, I'll try to get you there." Leora's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "My homeworld is gone," she said flatly. "Or at least, it's gone for me." Elias glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She looked away, staring at the shifting starlight outside. "I was taken when I was young," she said slowly. "Sold from one place to another. Passed from hand to hand like I was a thing, not a person." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. "If my people are still out there." "They didn't come for me," she finished. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words. Instead, he simply asked, "Then, what do you want to do?" The question stopped her. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her life had always been about survival, not choices. The idea of choosing her own future felt both exciting and terrifying after a while. She spoke. "What would I even do if I stayed with you?" Elias gave a faint smile. "You could help me run this ship," he said. "Help with repairs, navigation, even trading." "I'm not trained for that," she replied quickly. "You'll learn," he said simply. "Everyone starts somewhere." She studied him for a moment. "You're serious?" she said, as if testing him. "I am," he replied. "But it's your choice." He leaned back in his chair, letting her think. Her gaze drifted around the ship, the worn but clean walls, the console lights blinking softly, the folded blankets still on the bed from tweaked Voss. Her first night, it wasn't much, but it was the first place in years that didn't feel like a cage. They traveled in silence for a while. The hum of the engines filling the air, Leora moved to the co-pilot seat, glancing at the control panel. "What's that one do?" she asked, pointing to a small switch that activates the external sensors. Elias replied, "And that one." "Landing stabilizers," she nodded slowly, filing the information away without realizing it. She had started imagining herself sitting in that seat for longer than a single journey. Hours later, they stopped at a small refueling station orbiting a barren moon while the ship was being serviced. Elias stepped outside to check the hull. Leora stayed near the ramp, scanning the area. This place was quiet, but quiet places could hide danger. When Elias returned, carrying a small bag of fresh supplies, she followed him back inside without hesitation. It was a small thing, but even she noticed she hadn't thought about running once. That night, they sat at the small table, sharing a simple meal of bread, stew, and tea. Leora ate in silence for a while, then said, "If I stay, you'll keep your word." Elias looked up from his cup. "My word." "That you won't put me in chains," she said, her tone sharp. He met her gaze without flinching. "I'll keep it," he said. "You have my word." She didn't answer immediately, but something inside her settled at those words. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. After they finished eating, Elias stood and began clearing the table. "You should get some rest," he said. "We'll have a long day tomorrow." She tilted her head. "So you've already decided I'm staying?" He gave a small shrug. "No," he said, "but I hope you will." Leora thought about it long after he went to his quarters. Her mind tried to list all the reasons she should leave: the dangers of staying, the risk of trusting, the fear of being betrayed again, but every time she imagined walking away, the image felt wrong. She remembered him standing in front of her in the courtyard, taking the bite of the hunter's attack without hesitation. She remembered the clean water, the warm bed, the way he had asked her opinion instead of ordering her. By the time the first light of a distant sun filtered through the viewing window, her decision was made. When Elias stepped into the main room, she was already there. Sitting in the co-pilot's seat, he raised an eyebrow. "Morning," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'm staying," she said, her voice firm. A small smile touched his lips. "Good," he said. "Then we've got work to do." For the first time, Leora allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be something more than survival. And though she would never admit it out loud, a small part of her felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had been left behind on Zarthon. Weeks passed, and the galaxy beyond Zarthon became their road. Leora had learned how to power up the ship's engines, how to check the navigation charts, and even how to repair a loose cable without frying the circuits. Elias was patient, never rushing her, never making her feel like she had to earn her place. She began to realize that he didn't just keep his promises, he built his life around them, and, for the first time, she didn't feel like a burden or a problem to be solved, but the shadow of the merchant still lingered in her mind. Some nights she dreamed of cages, of rough hands dragging her into the dark. Each time she would wake with her claws digging into the blanket, her heart pounding. Elias never pried, but she noticed he started locking the ship's hatch at night. Not to keep her in, but to keep others out. One quiet morning, they landed on a green, unspoiled world to trade supplies. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers. Leora followed Elias into the small settlement, her golden eyes scanning every detail. The people here didn't stare at her with fear or mockery. They nodded politely, as if her silver skin and sharp eyes were nothing unusual. It was a strange and welcome change. As they prepared to leave, a voice called from across the landing field. It was a young alien boy, waving to them with a wide grin. He ran up, holding out a small carved wooden figure, a bird with outstretched wings. "For you," he said to Leora. "You look like you could fly too." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. No one had given her a gift in she couldn't even remember how long. She took it carefully, nodding once. "Thank you," she said quietly. That night, back on the ship, she set the carving on the console. Elias noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he handed her a data pad with a trade manifest. "Think you can handle the next exchange?" he asked. She smirked slightly. "Watch me," she said. And for once, there was no trace of bitterness in her voice. Their next stop was the very market where they had first met. Leora's muscles tensed as the familiar sounds and smells filled the air. She remembered every detail: the black stone platform, the cage, the merchant's smug grin. Elias seemed to sense her unease. "You don't have to be here," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No," she said, "I do." They walked together through the crowd until they reached the merchant's stall. The same fat alien stood there, though his injured finger was now a faint scar. When his 4 eyes landed on Leora, they widened in shock. She was no longer in rags, no longer crouched behind bars. She stood tall beside Elias, her gaze steady, her shoulders unbound by chains. "Well," the merchant said slowly, "look who survived." Leora stepped forward, close enough for him to see the sharp gleam in her eyes. "I didn't survive," she said coldly. "I lived." The merchant's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. The crowd that had begun to gather whispered among themselves, recognizing the once untamable girl. Elias placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not to restrain her, but as a silent reminder that they didn't need to prove anything to him. They turned and walked away, leaving the merchant to choke on his own pride. Every step away from that stall felt like closing a door she had never thought would shut. By the time they reached the ship, the weight she had carried for years felt lighter, not gone, but no longer controlling her over the next months. She and Elias became known among certain trade routes. The human and the silver-skinned girl who never stayed in one place for long. Some called her dangerous, others called her loyal. But those who really knew her understood she wasn't untamable anymore. She was unbreakable. One evening, as they flew past a sea of stars, Leora sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the infinite expanse ahead. Elias glanced at her. "You've changed," he said. Not as a question, but as a fact. She thought about it for a moment, then gave a small, almost shy smile. "So have you," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You don't walk alone anymore," she said simply. He chuckled softly at that. But he didn't argue. The truth was, they had saved each other in ways neither had expected. The ship was still small, the jobs sometimes rough, and the galaxy still dangerous, but for Leora, danger was no longer something to run from. Because now, she had a choice, and she had chosen to stay. The carving of the wooden bird still sat on the console, its wings forever open, whenever Leora looked at it. She remembered that boy's words, "You look like you could fly too." And somewhere deep inside, she knew he had been right. The untameable girl from the cage was gone. What remained was a woman who could fly anywhere she wanted, and she had no intention of ever being caught again.